The Scary Old West. Stories from the American frontier. From Scario.com. Now you can find a version of this story in Creepypasta. They call it Portraits or The Cabin in the Woods, and it features a hunter. In the version that I always heard and loved, it was The Cowboy and the Cabin. It was sunny when they left the ranch in the valley and started up the canyon. There weren't any other horses or cattle. It was just the cowboy and his horse. The valley was quiet, calm, but both the horse and the rider were uneasy. It was sunny when they started out, but as the afternoon wore on, storm clouds formed. The cowboy saw it, and the horse saw it. They both knew what was coming. They'd ridden together through storms before, but nothing like this. The horse knew why they kept heading toward the canyon. Normally, they'd turn back from a storm like this, seeing all the warning signs. Leaves beginning to rustle in the wind. The trail ahead turned more to shadow than light. The little stream alongside the trail began to splash with water gushing down the mountain, but the horse knew they wouldn't turn back, and so did the cowboy. Soon they heard the roar of distant thunder, and not long after that the sky was split with curtains of lightning. The little stream was clear at first, but then became crowded as it carried leaves, then twigs, and then branches, as the storm grew stronger and the mountain gave more and more of itself to the stream. Soon the sky is so dark that the flashes of lightning are the only way to follow the trail. As they climb the steep canyon, the trees take on shadowy forms, long arms and clutching fingers at the end of jagged and writhing branches. Already dangerous, the trail made of loose rock was becoming slick and wet, and the horse's hooves slip and clop against the rock. The trees move in concert with the wind of the storm. As lightning flashes through the trees, the shadowy forms move and seem to follow the cowboy. His imagination makes every sound a monster. In the dark, the horse's hooves banging on the rocks. In the steeper sections, the water runs down the rocky walls, but they don't call it a stream in those parts. They call it a spring. And as the cowboy approaches the narrower parts of the steep trail, the cliff sides carry the water, but it isn't running down the sides. It's shooting like geysers out of the walls, and the stream below had crossed the trail many times, something the cowboy had never seen before. He climbs down from the horse so he can lead him, and they can both simply walk through the narrow slot canyon and the treacherous, loose, wet rock. A light flashes behind them, lighting the rocks and trees ahead. Shapes and shadows moving ominously close. Just then, thunder crashes with a low roar that rumbles through the air, vibrates in the man's chest, and the ground shakes the cowboy's boots, his heart pounding along with the sounds. The raindrops fall thick and hard, splashing on his hat, the shoulders of his coat, and the saddle. The horse shakes his head. Water splashes from his mane and forelock. They hit the canyon walls where the spring is spraying out the jets of water, combining their energy, making the stream below boil and splash, growing large and powerful from the storm. It was icy cold, and the valley was warm. Well, the valley was warm at one time, long ago. It was icy in the valley now, just like the storm, icy, cold, and menacing. The valley was no more welcoming than the cold, dark, and wet canyon. The cowboy wouldn't go back. He knew the dangers of a storm, but he didn't know what was following them. He only knew it was dangerous, and that it was in the valley, his home. Once a sanctuary from all his cares, but no more. No, Now he left. He ran. He would have called a man chicken to turn tail and run from his home, but he was leaving now, running. He was never going back, no matter what you called it. Riding away, he thought he was already clear of the danger in the valley, but then the storm came, so suddenly and furiously, he wondered if the thing in the valley brought the storm with it too. They reached a fork in the road, a trail they'd never taken before, but they took it now, and the horse knew his cowboy was looking for a new place to stay. They plodded along for what seemed like hours before the lightning flashed, and something in the light had looked like a shelter. The horse didn't need any encouragement. He headed for what looked like a warm barn as fast as he could. When they got there, it was easy to see it had been empty for a long time, but there was a stable for the horse, and there was a cabin for the cowboy. So he put the horse in the stable and went into the cabin alone. There was an old wood stove and a table across from the door, a cot along one wall, and the opposite wall was filled with pictures. They were horrific images of deathly faces, skulls, beasts with fangs slathered with blood, and cold staring eyes that sent cold chills up the man's spine. So the cowboy climbed onto the cot at the far wall and lay down, facing away from the portraits. He slept poorly, waking often, staring at the portraits on the wall. Shaking his head and trying to ignore them, he turned away and forced himself to try and rest. The thunder would wake him, and the lightning brilliantly illuminated the hideous pictures. The long night was torturous, but eventually the storm cleared, and the sun rose and light filled the cabin. The cowboy turned over, curious to see the portraits in the daylight, but the portraits had disappeared. There weren't any pictures on the wall at all. They were all windows.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast from Stereo.com.
Copyright 2020 Stereo.com. Some content used with permission from various authors.